Good morning, Uncivilized Vitality, and I'm going to briefly explain our political stance. Okay, so Uncivilized Vitality's political stance. I know we get asked that quite a bit, like, what kind of organization are you? Because everyone's obsessed with being in their forced dichotomy of left or right or different things. So I want to go over that a little bit in this video. First, to remind people of some things, we have another video out there, and you know that in general, you're divided up into a left-right political spectrum, right? And you get, conservative, liberal, Republican, Democrat, and you get that. And then people are, one of the typical frame forces of civilization, you're pressed into this false choice. There are some things that you might not know. First of all, that left-right spectrum only applies to the size of government. So if you think of the type of government, how much government do you want in your life? As you move toward the right, at the very end of the right spectrum is anarchy. That's no government at all. And at the very end of the left, at the very end on the left side of the spectrum is complete government. That's communism, okay? So depending on where you stand on the sliding scale of how much government do you want in your life, in your state, you're either going to slide from complete anarchy all the way down to communism. And then in the middle would be, the Goldilocks, just the right amount of government. Depends on how you feel about that. But as you move further toward less government, you'll get conservatives and then libertarians. Right? And on the left end, you'll get someone with a little more liberal, classic liberal thought. Then you get socialism. Then you get fascism, true fascism. And I know a lot of times people conflate because of history and purposeful conflation by government civilization. People put or think of fascism as a right end of the government spectrum, but it's not. The amount of government that you want, fascism belongs, this would be Goldilocks, I guess. Goldilocks. Fascism is over here between socialism and communism. Fascism is a governmental system whereby private corporations are leveraged to get government work done. So basically the corporations work for the government. Lots of ways we're in a fascistic state now in the United States. When you think about the Federal Reserve and the CDC and such, don't want to get into that too much. But that's basically these political terms that people use to represent their personal and community and family values is conflated with the idea of how much government is the right amount of government. So when we say government, you have to have some way to govern the state. Excuse me. So the state being the old idea from the Greeks of the totality of society. So that would be the state, and you have to have some way to govern it. Plato came up with, or mentioned in the Republic, when he wrote the Republic, which is ironic that it's named the Republic, when they were describing the ideal state, or the best way for humans to live in a civilized society. Remember, they were already civilized, and we'll get to that in a second. But he said that, so it's usually portrayed as the best form of government, but what he really meant is it's the least worst. It's the least terrible way to govern is an aristocracy. Then something called a timocracy, which is not named for my excellent lab assistant, Tim, although Tim is awesome. A timocracy, then you had an oligarchy, a democracy, and then a tyranny. Right? So from least terrible to the most terrible form of government. So not the amount of government. This would be, the left-right spectrum is the amount of government. This would be the type of government, according to Plato. And evidently we need government for state. State would be just at the society level. So you go from individual, family, community, cultures and subcultures to societies. You need some way to govern that. If you're in small hunter-gatherer style bands and you stay under the 120, which is assumed to be the 120 to 150 as the best number of individuals in a small band, you can run completely free form of government, or an egalitarian form of self-governance. Once you get over that number and talking society level at the state, unfortunately you will need some sort of way to coordinate and govern or manage that society. And you can think about the amount of government, the type of government, and then you'd have to think about the substance of that government that would agree with your values. And we have to all kind of figure that out. But a lot of times we get caught up because the people that are in charge of civilization will conflate these terms and confuse us and set us fighting against one another. Just for real quick, an aristocracy would be the form of government where he saw dedicated, like, philosopher kings who were trained only to govern. They couldn't do anything else, and they did it as best they could. Timocracy is one that's based on like honor and merit, like, well, I'll run as best I can just because I say I can and I'm an honorable person. And it has to involve quite a bit of trust. An oligarchy is a rule by a small group of wealthy elites. A democracy is mob rule. Basically, the majority, you know, that old example where if you have 10 people and 7 of them say they're going to steal your bike, you have to give it to them. Mob rule. And then tyranny, which is one or two people who rule primarily just for the benefit of themselves. In some ways, we are currently in a tyrannical, fascistic oligarchy, but you could make that argument. But there are other ways you can think about it as well. So this would be sort of the type of rule, and you notice it's from the group down, and that was in Plato's Republic. You can read more about that. Obviously, the United States is a constitutional republic, whereby we have a founding document that protects the minority from the majority. When we use the democratic process, we are not a democracy, thank goodness, because that's just one step above tyranny. But when we govern the state, why do we need a state? And why have we taken, obviously we talked about why we need a state, or why we need government for a state that big. But when you go back to, like, why are we civilized in the first place? I was thinking about that. Why did we civilize our societies, right? Who benefits, right? Who benefits from a civilized society? There are a couple examples there. I always, like in the uncivilized meetings and such, I talk about the civilization, and there's 2 words that you'll find, right? The Greek word for city and the Latin word for city, civis, which gives us civilian, and polis, from which we get politician, right? So you can think of it this way. These are 2 classes of civilized people. You get the politicians, who would be the sort of a blend of these types. They're a specially trained, some would say oligarchy, who help run our democratic process. The more politicians we have would be on this sliding scale from communism to anarchy. And then civilians, they would be the rest of the people that live in the civilized society. And a civilized society is one that is set up with hallmarks of city living. So you have cities, you have advanced technology that runs your life, you have reliance on agriculture, right? There are other aspects of civilization that I have defined or clarified in other videos. But the ideal for the politicians would be they run the things, and obviously the more control, the more government of them, composed of them, the better for them. And then the citizens are underneath. What I need, honestly, is another term for the non-civilized folk, the general population. Now, I have often in my head just referred to the rest of us as Gen Pop, but most people know that as a prison term when you get put into general population, when you're not in, like, in the shoe or something. So skipping that, does anyone have, or think in the comments, a better term for people that are members of a society that are not civilized? Like, so go pre-civilized societies, hunter-gatherer societies, large states. We call them populars. We could say plebeians. There's a socialite, which but socialite brings to mind ideas like politicians. So they would be like the more elite members of a society. So I'm looking for something besides better than Gen Pop. Right? So anyway, back to civilization. Who benefits from having a civilized society? Well, there are a few people that do. The politicians, for one. The other people live in the city. They don't live in the high rises. They don't have millions and billions of dollars. You don't go into Congress worth $500,000, get elected, and then by the end of your 4-year term, you're worth 30 million. That doesn't happen ethically, legally, morally. It just doesn't happen that way. But somehow all our politicians end up benefiting themselves. So who benefits? The politicians, right? The members of the polis, the city, the civilization, they benefit a little bit more than the civilians do, right? So that's who benefits. However, there are a couple other exceptions when we think about who benefits, right? Anytime you have in evolutionary biology or in evolutionary psychology or in any evolving set of people or animals, when you see persistent patterns over time, persistent patterns are indicative of benefit. Ultimately, to humans or other animals, when you have a persistent pattern that is indicative of benefit, that benefit is increased reproduction. So differential reproductive success. So if you have a particular behavior, pattern, outlook, tool, trait, whatever, that allows you to have more children than the other, then you're going to end up winning. So why do we have civilized societies as opposed to more free societies? Because civilized societies, these persistent patterns of grouping together, organizing in hierarchical states, using advanced tech, living in agriculture, these have conveyed certain benefits on civilizations that have allowed them to out-reproduce the non-civilized societies from 6, 7, 8,000 years ago. We know that because there are now more than 8 billion people on this planet, and that's up a lot. I think there were, I mean, look what, the end of the 60s, early 70s, there was half that. You know, just in my lifetime, we've doubled the number of people on the planet. That's crazy. But it just shows that it works. However, just because there's a persistent pattern that benefits a certain part, the politicians, as opposed to the hunter-gatherer, it doesn't mean that it's going to continue or that it is purposeful. So I'm not making out to be like, oh, the politicians planned this necessarily. There may be some aspect to that. When you get over here in the types of governments, they have more direct, and the amount of government, they have more direct influence on our societies. But sometimes you can have incidental cui bono. So you can have a benefit. So for instance, the example that I was thinking of is a Toxoplasma gondii, which is a little parasite that gets in it's the zombie bug. What is it, a lancet fluke or some kind of worm? It gets in the brain of ants and causes them to climb to the tips of blades of grass where the birds will eat them more easy, or the herbivores will eat them more easy. And then they get into the stomach of the other animals where they need to complete their life cycle. Just look it up. The details on it. It's pretty gory, sometimes called the zombie parasite. But that's a hidden benefit. So you would think, okay, if you're just looking at the ant, like, why does the ant keep climbing to the top of that grass? There's got to be some reason for that persistent pattern of behavior that conveys benefit to the ant, right? That's not true. So if you apply that, it's a benefit to the Toxoplasma gondii, but we don't see that. So there are sometimes hidden levels of cui bono. So if we think of, well, humans are, because we hear this all the time when I say uncivilized vitality, they say, well, civilization is good for everybody. It's brought everybody out of poverty and it's done this, that, or the other thing. And that's not true. Human societies have advanced but only a hidden few have directly benefited the most from civilized societies, just like that Toxoplasm gondii, that little parasite. They've benefited most, but their benefit is hidden under the apparent benefit or the mysterious benefit of the rest of us, the civilization. Like living in cities is terrible. Anyone's ever been to a city, it's just they're just gross. They're cramped. There's disease. Everybody's always angry. It's like that ant keeps climbing up the grass. We see this pattern over and over. Cities develop, cities come and go, last for thousands of years. We've lived like this, and there doesn't seem to be an apparent benefit as opposed to hunter-gatherers who still live in a way that's healthier, just on a smaller scale. So, like the Toxoplasma gondii, maybe the politicians have that hidden benefit. The other thing that could apply instead of elite conspiracies would be lapsed benefits. Sometimes we see patterns in nature that have continued even though they've outlived their usefulness. Right? So maybe at one point, if you go back 12,000 years ago, around the agricultural revolution, maybe there was some sort of planetary cataclysm, ice age or something, that necessitated our turning to agriculture and living in cities where we could protect ourselves and we could rely on each other more intimately than we did in a hunter-gatherer band, so that we could survive and move forward. And that did allow the development of things like writing and script and other things. But after the cataclysm has gone its way, after the ice age has receded, and instead of moving back out of the cities and going back to our small hunter-gatherer bands, we stayed together. That would be an example of a lapsed benefit. An example would be the so-called sweet tooth phenomenon, or the selfish gene in humans that say in nutrition, like we crave sweet things because of the quick energy. And in the old days, before civilization, if you wanted something sweet, you had to fight the bees to get some honey, or you had to wait for the fruit to come in season. And then you would gorge yourself because you would get that free energy, pack on a little fat for the winter, and you developed a persistent pattern of behavior that said, that's sweet, eat as much of it as I can get my hands on. And that benefit at one point helped us. Now, when sugar and sweet things are literally everywhere and available 24/7, that benefit has backfired. It's become sort of detrimental to our health. I say the same thing about civilization. At one point, maybe it was a big help, but it has since run its course, and there's more negative than there is positive. I say that there could be hidden benefits for certain smaller groups that we don't realize, that it's not a benefit to everybody, because it's a strange idea that we keep living in cities and flocking when we know that that's not conducive to health. It might be hidden like the toxoplasm, right? Anyway, that's a little bit about civilization and why we are civilized. There's a couple ideas there. The lapsed benefit or the hidden benefits, as opposed to just some sort of elite world-hungry group has civilized us for their own ends and purposes. Conspiracy just means breathing together or acting in concert for mutual goals. You don't even have to communicate for that to happen. So think about that, and then really go back to not jumping to conclusions by misusing terms. You don't have to be left or right. That doesn't define your values. Obviously, there will be some correlation with these values if you start to really get down into it. People that have certain values tend to also value less government. Other people that have more values or different values tend to favor more government. You could also think about this, neither one, until we get over here, or even over here. At the extreme ends, they're bad, but in the middle, 80% of us are more alike than not. You could also, and I've heard this described this way, toward the right end are people who are more individual focused, and people that tend left are more community focused. And if you look at my SBO scale from individual down to society, you see it starts with the individual, and then as we place a little more reliance on the individual, you tend to be more on the right side and smaller government. If you tend to be focused more on communal living, you'd be a little bit toward this side, right? We're not going to get into male and female psychology about community and individualism and the biological truths that drive that, but it is a part of it. And you can see how that would drive us one way or the other if you could stop and think about it without getting excited about all the labels. Most of us want to be you know, somewhere in the middle, this Goldilocks, right? Most of us are perfectly fine with some government because we see the necessity of it. But generally we want as little, we being UV, we would want as little as is functionally possible. So the less government, the better. Within reason. We don't want complete anarchy. But that would be kind of our political stance. As far as the types go, the democratic process works really well. It would be nice to have a timocracy or aristocracy as opposed to this tyrannical oligarchy that we seem to have, that we call Congress, where it's just millionaires running the decisions for everyone else. But we don't have any better answers yet. So the constitutional republic that we have is probably the best form of state management or governance that human beings have ever seen. I know we're going to get comments from people on that, but make sure that you read all the relevant data and think out your premises before you start yelling at me in the your conclusions in the comments. But think about how hunter-gatherers used to live and the ways we could extrapolate benefits or beneficial behavior patterns from them and then apply it now. So I'm not saying we have to move out of cities and become anarchists and you know, go back to living in trees and caves and such. I say that in the book. I just think there are things we could learn from pre-civilized societies that we can apply now to the benefit of everyone. So that's our political stance. We had to clarify some terms and then move forward from there and just remind people, don't conflate your values with how much government you want. Complete no government, which is dangerous with this many people on the planet living in a civilized society. You can't have anarchy. You also can't have you know, more big daddy government all the way down here, right? No daddy government. Leave some comments below. Go back to that idea in the comments if someone could help me out. Let's come up with a good term I could use that means a member of a society. Members of a civilization are called civilians or politicians or the proletariat or whatever term you want to use. But we can't say Gen Pop. I mean, we could, but it's too funny to me. So that's it. Leave a thumbs up if you like this video or this kind of content explaining more about what uncivilized vitality is, because sometimes that gets lost. And share, buy me a coffee. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notifications. It helps if you watch the video that comes out each week, every Wednesday at 9 a.m. We put that up. And that's probably it for now.